This is one of the sermons where I have no idea really what I'm going to say. So I want to start with you. When you think of Mary, whether you've grown up kind of idolizing her or just thinking she's just this teenage girl, or whatever, when you think of Mary, mother of Jesus, what comes to mind?
Holy.
Say it loud, Holy. Scared, yeah. Poor. Courageous. Give me two more.
Humble.
Yeah.
Exhilarated.
Yeah. She was exhilarated. She was excited and scared. She went through all those emotions, as we all do. But we often can imagine, if you look at artwork, you see Mary as pure and virginal and innocent. She's a great mother. She raised her son well. She's always got him in her arms. She overcame the stigma of premarital pregnancy that was even stronger then than it is today. If you look at those pictures of art, you see her usually painted with alabaster skin to highlight how pure people think she was, as though white has something to do with purity. I can't imagine. The pictures all portray her as this touching, caring mother, and it's probably true, and it's easy to imagine and kind of think of her making cookies out of the honey that we talked about last week for all of Jesus' little boyhood friends, and it's easy to imagine her. She's only a few years older than him, but kissing his little boo-boos when he gets hurt. If you want to be a good mom, Mary is this great image to follow after. And so it should come with some dissonance to us to imagine how tough she had to be to deal with that stigma of having a baby out of wedlock. Imagine the thick skin that she had to deal with all those other women in Nazareth who didn't pay any attention to her. Remember the woman at the well that was all alone at noon when Jesus came to talk to her? She was there at noon, hours after all the other women got water, because they all picked on her for being married 4 times and living with another man. Mary must have dealt with the same thing. A baby before she was married? Are you kidding me? We won't talk to her. She must have known the ugly ways that people treat her and they treat everybody else. She must have known the judgment and the bitterness, and she lived on. She persevered. Now teenagers know, best of all, that you teach your moms everything they know, right? Right? Do you think Mary had any lessons that Jesus took away? Do you think Mary had any hopes and dreams and beliefs? She had feelings about how the world should be. She had issues that were on her heart before Jesus grew up. She wanted her baby to follow in those footsteps. And in the song Trisha just read, Mary, while she is still pregnant, sings this hope that maybe she can raise her son to have compassion, to feed the hungry. But at the same time, maybe she should raise her son to have the chutzpah to send the rich away empty. We can feed the hungry. That's pretty easy. It takes a lot more to balance the world. And if you think that class conflict is just a 21st century American thing, read closer in that whole Bible. Before Jesus, Mary was the one whose song was loaded with social controversies at the fabric of all humankind. She was the one who wanted to turn the world upside down. She was the one who demanded justice. Does anyone remember last year I told you what the name Mary means? Miriam is actually in the Hebrew. What does Miriam mean? Yeah, you didn't pay attention last year because it's awesome. It means rebellious. That's what Mary's name means, is rebellious. And it's easy to think of little boys being rebellious. It's easy to think of grown-up Jesus as this rebel on a mission. I think there was a popular book about that last year. It's easy to think of Christians today rebelling against injustice. But little fragile, doting, teenage, hopeful, Pollyanna, Mary, rebellious? We know she was young, somewhere between 12 and 18. Let's just split the middle. Let's say she met the angel at 15, she had her baby at 16. Pretty young. Can you imagine her at 18 toting around a toddler to a protest against Roman occupation? Maybe at 21, she tries to get him to bed while she goes out and has a meeting with all the other women in town to demand women's rights. Maybe he was 10 years old. And he said, Mom, I don't understand. People at school, they say they don't understand why you're the only woman who argues at town meetings. They always pick on me because you and Dad collect all these baskets of food for poor people. Mom, why do you complain so much about the way people treat our slaves? It's easy to envision Jesus learning compassion from his mother, but might he have followed in her footsteps toward justice as well? Now, I say that you don't have to believe anything about Jesus as God or the Son of God or any of that stuff. You don't have to believe in anything about Jesus' incarnation to be totally impressed how that man managed to embody love in two ways. It's so hard to hold on at the same time. On one side, he dealt with people personally. So many stories where he meets a disabled homeless person and he says to them, how can I help you? You want to know how to talk to people on the streets? There's your question. How can I help you? At the same time, he embodied love systematically as he challenged powers and governments that held people down. I try to do both, but usually I'm either kind or I'm just. The amazing thing about Jesus the man is that he brought into the world a love that can be caring and transformative. And whatever you believe about Mary being a virgin or not, isn't it possible, isn't it likely that she was the one who taught him how to combine those two ways of God's love? And if that were true, what would Mary do today? If she was here right now, what lesson would the Mother of God give to our world today? My guess is this, just to set the picture of what Mary would look like today. She had a husband who works construction, blue-collar guy. He's not the father of her baby, by the way. The baby has dark skin, not like in the pictures. He goes to school probably every day and sees the Roman soldiers policing the town, and the family travels to Jerusalem, certainly aware of the militaristic presence, ready for any uprising that the rabble-rousers might have. She knows that as her boy grows up, other boys his age are going to join this group called the Sicarii, kind of like a freedom fighter gang. They would carry these little bitty swords that they could hide under their tunics. She was probably scared of what he might get into, especially as she taught him justice. She knew that other young men were angry at the system that holds them down for good reason. She knows the world is broken. She knows her son is in danger. She wants to fix things, but it's her boy she wants to protect. Twitter last week, some of you on Facebook, some of you as your profile pictures on Facebook, you've seen the hashtag blow up. It says Black Lives Matter. For anyone listening online, there's not a black face in this church right now. Black Lives Matter. And if you don't know what Twitter is or what hashtags are, that's fine. But you have to know in America right now, we're facing the greatest racial conflict, at least since Rodney King, maybe since Martin Luther King. If that doesn't touch you directly because we're cloistered in the mountains, please just pay attention for your own heart's sake. Or if in your mind, when I said Black Lives Matter, you went to this point where you said, it's Eric Garner's fault because he is kind of a knucklehead. Or it's Michael Brown's fault because he did rush the policeman. It's Trayvon Martin's fault because he did wear a hoodie, and that's a little intimidating. It is Tamir Rice's fault because he was carrying a toy gun that looked very realistic. And frankly, all this looting that goes on, if there's looting going on, it must not be a worthwhile movement anyway. If that's how you're dealing with this moment in our history, you're missing the point. And I'm going to pray for you that you hear Mary's song and see the light of justice that she dawns into Christmas. The point is not the details of our litany of instances in the news today. The point is that in our time now, black lives don't matter. They haven't. They don't matter. They haven't in our country's history, haven't been equal since we've had a country. We allow people to defend their heart with words, coded words like thug which is just a nice way to say nigger, which you can't say out loud, can you? It's fine to prop up continued racial tension in every other way possible. Black lives don't matter. But I feel and I hope and I sense that we are getting to a point, a boiling point, where white Christians, next to black Muslims, next to these old New Age hippies, next to bearded young hipsters, can march and bring some change into the world. I hope we are at the dawn of a new age where all people recognize that we are tied together and that we must support each other and must love each other. Frankly, we've prepared enough. We've prepared enough. Advent is about preparation. We've prepared enough. How much longer will it be until God brings justice? God, my prayer is, Gail's prayer is, bring justice now.
We wait for your coming. We wait for new life. We wait in our despairing. We wait through the strife. But how long? How long? How much longer must we wait? How long? How long? How much longer must we wait? Lord, we are forsaken. We yearn to be free. Sam said change is gonna come, but right now we can't breathe. How long? How long? How much longer must we wait? How long? How long? How much longer can we wait?
The song is an Advent song written in response to the crisis our country is having now. It's a friend of Gail's from back in New Jersey, a black man who wrote that. I don't know what's going on in my heart through all of this. Friday night I was at one of these functions, one of these galas where I had to wear a tie. And my girlfriend later she said, what's been wrong? You don't seem the same. Something's wrong. What's wrong? And the sermon, unwritten at that point, just kind of thought about, was just sitting there hanging. And I didn't know how to say these words. I knew they were going to be hard. They're not an accusation. They're just my hard heart. Because all I can do is preach God's word. It's not shaking a finger. When we sat down at our table with a couple people, it was loud. I didn't know anyone. I was the plus one. And then 2 black women sat at our table. And all I could think about was, I just want to ask them, what do you feel about this? What's your opinion? Tell me something. But I couldn't. I couldn't just make them a token of information for me. I couldn't make them a token of feelings just to share for me. And so I resisted. And that's because the Black Lives Matter isn't the point either. And if Mary was here, she'd be the first one to tell us that Black Lives Matter isn't the point. She's the mom of a dark-skinned boy, one boy, who she taught to view the world through rebellious eyes, which is dangerous. And he was killed by authorities as a perceived threat, a rabble-rouser, an uncooperative subject under the presumption of guilt. Mary never would have said, Jewish lives matter. She would have said, my son matters. She would have said, Jesus, son of Joseph, matters. Because what matters, just as much as changing a broken system, is the men and women whose fate is wrapped up in the system. And so I say Marcus Bivens matters. He's the first black man that I really hung out with. I was 14 until I ever had the chance to really talk to someone. I say Boo Buchanan matters. Boo was one of my students back at the University of Arkansas. He was smarter than me when he was one of my students. He's smarter than me now. We've had one conversation about race in the last 15 years, and this, for the first time, Boo is now my black friend. But Boo Buchanan matters. And I say Jabulani McAllister matters. He's a pastor up in Rhode Island. He deals with men all the time who face this. You don't know them, but they matter to me, and the social controversy matters to me because of them. The lesson that Jesus' life shows, and the lesson instilled by his mother, is that any progress blessed by God is personal, and it is systematic. And if your heart doesn't cry out for both sides of that, you're missing something. Little time out. Some of you are thinking about the men on the other side of this issue. And I want us to remember that at the cross, there was a centurion at the base of the cross who was transformed and recognized the importance of this moment. And you can imagine him joining the church later. And earlier in the Bible, we know that Jesus was amazed. The only time in the whole Bible where Jesus is amazed. Wouldn't you like to be the guy who amazed Jesus? It was a general, a Roman general, who praised, and Jesus praised him. And many of you have heard me say how much of a fan I am of our current police system. Many of you have heard me say other things during the summertime, but we are blessed with Paul and Larry and their force. Our community is honored to have those men serve and protect us. In fact, I think we should pray and support our police forces everywhere because they are on the front lines of an issue that we are all complicit in, and they're the ones who put their lives up at risk. I imagine that Mary was wise enough to embrace this and maybe to befriend some Roman soldiers and get to know them personally and talk with them about the difficulties of their job. Otherwise, Jesus never would have known this parable he put out there of walking a second mile. The rule wasn't then, the law was that if a Roman soldier asked you to carry his sword and his shield for a mile, you had to. That's the law. Jesus said, if they ask that, do it a second mile. Get to know them better. Talk to them for 2 miles. I can imagine Mary challenging them with more grace than I'm capable of, and I can imagine she teaching Jesus to fight the system while still caring for those who sometimes have to uphold it. And that's all a conjecture. We don't know anything about Mary. I don't know anything about Mary. But I'm painting this caricature, this personality from these little details that we can try to pull out. She is a woman mortally devastated at the loss of her son. But my guess is that she rebounded and worked even harder to enact the kingdom that he preached about and that she had envisioned. I can't point to this in the Bible. I can't point to it in any history. But I have to believe that as filled with joy as she was, and as filled with a vision of justice as she was before his birth, with that song, she probably gave herself even more after his death to fighting the causes of poverty and helping those who deal with their effects. Maybe 15 or 20 years later, we know from real history, we know that there was a protest in Jerusalem, a big protest in Jerusalem, and it was near the temple, and the Jews were throwing fruit at the Roman guards who were standing on the low wall of the temple. And do you know what the guard did? The guard turned around and mooned the protesters. Protesters climbed up, grabbed him, pulled him down, killed him. You can imagine what the Roman soldiers did next. Fought back hard, as I'm sure they thought they were justified in doing. This was a lightning moment in Jewish-Roman relations, and it just went downhill until Rome destroyed the entire temple a few years later. Things were tense, and I imagine, this is not in history, but I can imagine Mary there making sandwiches for some of these young guys, and they would come back from the protests, and she would say, I understand you're angry. I get it. I'm angry too. I've lost a lot in this struggle. But we must change the world with love, not violence. 4 years later, she'd be old. But what if she was at the next big protest where it seemed like all had been lost. The Romans had won. The police had won. They were used to violence. It was just so regular, and people were cowed in fear. And so the protest comes, and the soldiers come up. This is all in Josephus. The soldiers come up, and the Jews laid down on the ground, gave them their necks, and said, "You can cut my neck." They didn't say, "Don't shoot." They said, "Shoot. We've had enough. You win. Just cut us." And the Romans walked away. And nonviolence won the day. And if she wasn't there, if Mary wasn't there, her spirit was. Her spirit that lived through Jesus, her spirit that helped raise Jesus, her spirit that shaped how we all understand God and how God works, and her spirit that lives on in how we understand we are to work. It takes compassion to love deeply, and it takes a desperate vision of justice to enact that love in wide ways. And with God's help, may we be able to love deeply and widely. Amen.